October 5, 1992 is a historic day in our history, as it was on this day that the struggle for the restoration of democracy was finally won when free and fair elections were held after some 28 years of undemocratic and dictatorship rule by the then People's National Congress, PNC. Joining me in studio at this time to have a conversation on the October 5 and exactly the restoration of democracy is, starting from my immediate right, is the Honorable Anil Nandlall, Minister of Legal Affairs and Attorney General, Honorable Gail Teixeira, Minister of Parliamentary Affairs and Governance, as well as GECOM Commissioner Mr. Clement Rohee. Thank you all for taking time out of your schedules to be here as we discuss such a pertinent matter as well as a point of our history that we must not forget. So as we begin today's program, I'd like us to start specifically pre-1992. Let's have an understanding of what the country was like at that time. Perhaps we can start with you, Minister Teixeira, to paint that picture for us.
Pre-1992 was pretty miserable. It was dismal. The poverty was extreme in Guyana. We had kwashiorkor, which is where children have big bellies and red hair, of course not like mine. And the poverty levels, the study was done in 1991 to show that 61% of the population of Guyana was living below the poverty line. The availability of food, being able to purchase food, the issues regarding the services offered. I mean, in retrospect, when you look at 92, I was the Minister of Health, and I showed in Parliament the theatres of the public hospital that had broken equipment and mold everywhere. In all the theatres, you can imagine what was going on with post-operation infections. The people were poor. There were no housing programs. There were squatting settlements all over the place, which the PNC was bulldozing down in those days. The availability of jobs, and Rohee and I remember the period of redeployment, where thousands of workers lost their jobs in this country. And so there were bad times, hard times. And people were really punishing. And people were also migrating because they were looking for anywhere to go, including, we talk about migrants coming from Venezuela now, but the number of people who left Guyana to go to Venezuela, to go to Suriname, and illegally to United States and the islands, we lost probably 80,000 to 100,000 people just in that period. So these were, when you look at the narrative for me, as an older person looking back, is that it was dark. Houses weren't painted, people didn't have cars, and the number of cars, telephones, and so on. When you look at Guyana today, it is colors and progress, and you know, the differences are so stark and so palpable that one can't escape the difference of what happened then and what has happened after 92. You know, it's enormous. And just one point I want to make. When we look at October 5th, 1992, it mustn't be seen just as an event. It is the one most significant and decisive historical date in Guyana's history. That is what it is. It's only celebrating democracy being restored. It is the one significant and decisive historic date in Guyana, which changed the course of Guyana's history completely up to today.
Thank you. I know you mentioned the point there on, persons leaving Guyana, moving to Caribbean countries, other countries in South America and the U.S. Mr. Rohee, at that time, you had the portfolio of foreign affairs. So can you tell us a little bit about the perception of how the country was viewed pre-1992, and then after the PPP taking office, what was that like?
Well, the period pre-1992 was characterized by intense political struggles, which was initiated fundamentally by the emergence of a number of organizations that had come together. And Gail would know about the creation of the Committee for Defense of Democracy. That was known as the CDD, which brought together a host of political and social organizations to step up the struggle for democracy and free and fair elections, especially in light of the fact that a fraudulent referendum had just been held.
Yeah.
And the CDD was the body that brought these forces together to expose that fraudulent referendum to change the constitution, which we are living with up to now. That was followed by the emergence of the Patriotic Coalition for Democracy, which took on a different form, so to speak, from the CDD. The PCD now was more or less more politically advanced in terms of its goals. It was now an electoral alliance that had brought the key political forces together and some social organizations to advance the struggle for free and fair elections. It should be pointed out that at the same time, the Hoyt administration had just held another rigged elections in 1985, and that created further conditions for intensified struggle and unity of the democratic forces who were fighting not only for the restoration of democracy, but as an integral part of that struggle to restore democracy was the whole question of free and fair elections. So you had at that time the situation domestically where the struggle by the people, and this is when mass demonstrations were held in the country, never seen before for the first time, when they took Guyana. The quarantine, the East Coast, the East Bank, thousands of people were marching under the umbrella for the restoration of democracy and free and fair elections. Now, what was fortunate for us at that time was that the People's Progressive Party, with Dr. Jagan, was in the forefront of that struggle. Of course, you had some other political leaders and some other religious leaders and some members of the business community. But I should point out that at that time, because of the fear that Gail pointed to and the dark situation politically that existed at the time, there were many who were in support of the restoration of democracy and free and fair elections, but for fear of them being discriminated against, being intimidated, being harassed, whatever the case might be, they would not come to the forefront. But as the struggle intensified and it became clearer, both nationally and internationally, because the Cold War comes to an end, the atmosphere and the orientation of the United States, vis-a-vis the State Department and all other institutions in America, had moved in favor of countries fighting for free and fair elections. And so there were favorable conditions domestically and externally. And the PPP, the leadership of the PPP at that time, was keen in taking advantage of that situation in order to transform the struggle and take it much further. So that it was not only the people who are fighting in the country, because sometimes there's this view that, if it wasn't for the US, if it wasn't for the State Department, we wouldn't have gotten the government. That is partially true. I would not negate that. But of fundamental importance was a struggle that was taking place in this country that was supported by the external forces, the Guyanese diaspora, as well as the Western capitals as well. They saw what was happening. And it was because of that, and because of intense lobbying also, that it culminated in the victory of the PPPC in 1992. Of course, there were some who weren't happy with that, and who never wanted to see the PPP in government. And that has been spoken about and written about many times, the obstacles that were thrown in the way to prevent two things from happening. One, Dr. Jagan not becoming the presidential candidate, Gail, you know about that. And two, the PPP not being the majority in the government and in the parliament. But we overcame all of that. And that's how October the 5th, 1992 came into fruition. No, I was stopped there. Because to go on now to talk about what happened immediately after as Minister of Foreign Affairs, that might take another 5 minutes. So I would concede my time to...
I mean, I will allow you, but I just had one point to follow on what you were describing there.
Yeah.
Specifically on the point or the perception of the other countries, what would you say was that perception that they had of Guyana? And perhaps were we isolated in a sense from other countries, let's say trade, investment?
What do you mean by other countries?
Other countries outside, in the Caribbean or perhaps in the North America region.
Well, there was this pervasive view that they shouldn't remove Borneo because the alternative to Borneo was the communist jargon. But interestingly enough, because of the end of the Cold War, because the ideological picture had changed tremendously around that same time, that question became a non-issue. It had no place in the elections at all. And that is why when Dr. Jagan and many of his colleagues went to lobby Washington, London, Ottawa, they were so successful. So many countries saw Guyana, I think Gail put it correctly, that with the study that was done on how Guyana was viewed by some of these countries, the former finance minister, Mr. Greenwich, knows that Guyana had become nobody wanted to lend this country loans. You see, the economy was in shambles. But when the situation changed, those countries from the West or the Western capitals, they began to see at least some betterment or improving of the situation in Guyana, and therefore the need not only to lend support for the restoration of democracy, but to help Guyana back on its feet. That's why when President Carter came here, subsequently, he and Dr. Jagan and a number of other technical people worked on a plan to revive the Guyanese economy. And I think Vice President, he was an integral part of that, those days when that plan was being drawn up. I think it was called a National Development Plan. And he went several times...
National Development Strategy.
Strategy. He went several times to the Carter Center and around with the Carter Center to promote this development strategy for Guyana.
Minister Nandlall, one of the things that I must say is that as a young person witnessing in 2020 what happened, hearing stories of 92 and 97 and everything that happened around that time, having experienced it firsthand, but specifically I want to ask you, why, or perhaps you can describe to me the role of the court. How, pre-92, how did rigging continue? How was it allowed through the system?
So that is a very, very interesting question that we should really explore very deeply. So let's start with 1968. That was the first elections that were massively rigged in the country. A law was passed to allow for overseas voting to take place. Prior to the elections, a comrade in the PPP challenged those elections, along with other persons. The court then ruled that we had to await the conclusion of the elections before you can challenge it. That once the proclamation has been issued, Parliament is dissolved, a date is fixed for elections, the country is in election mode, the law is in election mode, and only subsequent to the elections you can file a petition. Bullers was the Chief Justice of the country, and he dismissed the case. The elections turned out to be massively rigged, more by the vehicle of overseas voting, utilizing the very thing that was being challenged prior to the elections. So the damage was done, filing an election petition didn't matter. Then you come to 73 elections. That one was also massively rigged. Attempts were made to file cases again by a gentleman by the name of C. Kumar Singh from Campbellville, another PPP activist. That one was dismissed as well on the same ground. You got to wait until the elections are concluded. Bollers again was the Chief Justice. It is no coincidence that after Bollers left the judiciary, he became the chairman of the Elections Commission.
Yeah.
You see these connections? Burnham and Shahabuddin quickly realized that they cannot continue this way without compromising the judiciary. They got through twice. How many more times will they get through? At that time, significantly, the apex court of the Guyana judiciary was the Privy Council. And that was the singular obstacle that would have prevented this authoritarianism to continue and this undemocratic rule and rigging of elections to continue. Burnham began a national campaign about turning Guyana into a republic, right, and about doing away with all the vestiges of colonialism, and we must be the masters and the architect of our own destiny. A lot of hyped up nationalism and patriotism sentiments. But in all of that, he had a hidden hand, and that was to remove the Privy Council. And that he did by 1973. Finished. The process started in 1970 with a Republican constitution, and the seed was laid there. In 2 quick years, the Privy Council was gone. He then had control of the judiciary. To demonstrate his control of the judiciary, he took the PNC flag and hoisted it on top of the Court of Appeal building. Then is when he moved the country into party paramountcy, meaning that the PNC party is the most paramount institution of the state, and everything else is beneath it, including the judiciary. So he was sending a message to the country that that is the one place where you think you can go for justice. Well, it has my flag flying on it. It was a mental as well as a legal and significant authoritarian symbol that was being sent. So then he quickly realized as well that he needed a constitution to further ensconce his power, because he couldn't do it with the constitution that the British had given him, which was called the Westminster-style constitution. He needed greater control, because if you are going to be a dictator, if you're going to remain in power without popular vote, you have to have the capability to do so. So the armed forces, the army and the police were identified as the instruments to keep him there, and that's why the army was used to rig the 73 elections with the ballot box martyrs. The army came, pick up the ballot boxes, take them to Camp in Ghana, throw away the real ballots, and stuff it with PNC ballots. But to give him further control, he needed the institutional mechanism now that will legitimize this absolute power that he wanted. And that's why my colleague Clement Rohee spoke about the rigged referendum. That referendum was rigged to create the foundation for him to promulgate a new constitution that would have all the trappings now, constitutionally and legally, to perpetuate himself in power. And once in power, rule supreme, absolutely, with very minimal and very artificial democratic trappings. And out of that context was born the 1980 Constitution. And that is what led the way till up to 92. So the struggle had to be confined in that context. Gail spoke, Rohee I think spoke about the 1985 Constitution. That was even more massively rigged than any other before.
Yeah.
Because in that one, I think the PPP got 8 or 9 seats. The People's Progressive Party, out of 65 seats, got 9 seats, I think, in that election. That was the most massively rigged of all elections. But with the absence of democracy, with the absence of freedom, with the imposition of authoritarianism, force and oppression, comes social degradation, economic stagnation, bankruptcy, and we travel that road. So by 1992, we were completely bankrupt. Yeah. Many people would like to credit Desmond Hoyt for allowing Carter and to agree to the reforms. Hoyt had no choice. Guyana, by that time, as Gail described, had become a basket case. Yeah. We were the second poorest country in the world in this hemisphere. The medical system had collapsed. The infrastructural system had collapsed. The educational system had collapsed. The Caribbean Council of Churches had done a survey in Guyana, and it reported that not only was the country broken, the economy broken, the country financially bankrupt, but the people were a broken people. In 1992, as a young man, I did not see a future in Guyana. Every young person in 1992 were trying to complete their schools and find a way out of Guyana. You did not see hope. You did not see a future. All you were thinking about was to migrate by whatever means necessary. And up to now, we continue. Though we are experiencing comparatively massive progress, we still have a migration problem outward. We have one inward that Gail spoke about, but we have one because the push and the pull factor. All the families had migrated to get away from the realities of a country without any future. You ask a question of Comrade Clement Rohee, how we were viewed externally. Guyana was viewed as a pariah state. You must have heard about the treatment that we were meted out to us in Trinidad. There was a bench called the Guyanese bench in Barbados. We were refugees all across the world, all across the Caribbean in particular. That is what the PNC reduced this country to. That is what the lack of democracy has done to Guyana. And we don't have to look. We experienced it here. And that is why this day is so important. And Guyanese must understand what it means. Because if ever we go travel that road again, the consequences are going to be the same. And if we are ever in doubt, the 2015 to 2020 has demonstrated that. Forget the incompetence, the corruption, the discrimination, and the lack of progress during those 5 years. Imagine where we would have been if the 2020 elections were allowed to be rigged. Where we would have been today, Guyana as a country. We would have been again back to that road of absolute and utter destruction. That's where we would have been today. We would have been again ostracized. We would have had no peace in this country. No investors would have come. You would have had an illegal government in power, and the civilized world would have cut all ties with us. We would have again become a basket case, and we would not have had this discussion.
Thank you, Minister Nandlall. I thought there for a moment that the cycle just would have continued, and once again we would have seen that happening. But specifically, if we're to just go back a bit, can you tell me what did those who had a hand in this, the control over that period, the direct subverting the will of the people, not allowing free and fair elections, what did they have to gain during that time?
Power.
That's all they had.
Power for power's sake.
They were prepared to rule over a graveyard. When they were prepared to kill, as they blew Walter Rodney to pieces, and they killed Father Dark in broad daylight, and they locked up so many people, they were prepared to travel the extremities just to keep themselves in power. And lived, I don't know what is it, what is the obsession? What is it about?
But you see, it's not so long ago, Anil, because in 2020, those same forces were willing to violate the will of the Guyanese people, to violate the constitution, and to thwart all the democratic forces to stay in power against the election results. So this is not I don't want people to think, this is the past we're talking about.
No, very
the past is only 3 years ago. where with the GECOM, and if you look at the commission inquiry results, that the findings, was that the GECOM senior officials clearly, in a biased way, were willing to thwart the laws and constitution to keep the government, the APNU AFC government, in power. And that's why this celebration of March the 2nd and August the 2nd, 2020, is as significant now in contemporary times, because we were on the precipice. All the work that was done, all the efforts between October 1992 to restore democracy, reconstruct a collapsed country. The architecture of the democratic state of this country was made under the PPP civic governments. This is our 6th time in government from 1992. But the whole entire architecture of a modern Guyana nation has been constructed and developed when the PPPC has been in government, and has been undermined in the 2015-20 period when they were in government. And so I don't want the public to get away, well, this is the past, and people have had a reformation of their thinking, and they're now enlightened. You're seeing the same kind of behavior in the 2015-2020 period of discrimination, of violation of the Constitution, where the president at the time was considered, and Christopher Ram wrote in an article about the head of state of any country in this hemisphere, where the highest, the greatest violations of the Constitution, of executive lawlessness, was Mr. Granger. And I think that's why I think we have to, the historical perspective mustn't be seen as this is long ago story. It is not long ago story. That democracy has to be prevailed upon, it has to be protected and guarded, not just by us in the PPC. It is the duty of every citizen of Guyana, regardless of their political affiliation, to guard the democratic rights of our people and of our nation. And that is the foundation of the architecture of a democratic nation, which is what, over the last 31 years, that we have been struggling as a nation to do. And I think that perspective is important, you know, because I don't want people to come away and say, well, all this is old-time story, Rohee and Gail talking old-time story, and this is not a problem now. In 2020 it was a problem. It showed how delicate the balance is, how easy it is to jump over the precipice or to be pushed over the precipice.
And how bold the perpetrators were. As I often remarked, Mingo attempted to pull that stunt in a glass building, a glass room. He didn't lock himself in a transparent glass. The entire international community, all the observers, all the political parties and their representatives are seeing into this room, and this man is attempting to rig this election. And if time permits, I will go into the attempts that they made before the elections.
Yeah.
We will get to that point, but I just want us to go back a bit. Of course, all of you have described what was not an easy walk in the park to 92. But can we talk about 92, PPP assuming office? What was that like? There was a lot to heal, for people to heal. There was a lot to put in place, systems to be corrected. And
the reconstructing of a collapsed nation, that's
correct.
what it was.
So can we talk a little bit about that? Start with you.
That's a lot to talk about indeed.
Yeah.
First of all, the country was saddled with a huge foreign debt.
Yeah.
That was a big question at the top of the agenda of the government at the time. How to address this question of the foreign debt which the country was saddled with. So there were two types of debt. One was the multilateral debt, and one was the bilateral. The government worked very hard to seek debt relief in respect to the bilateral debt. The multilateral debt, however, it was an extremely important tie to unknot, because this is where the multilateral lending agencies would have lent money to the government, and they, as a matter of principle, do not write off debts. You can get some relief in one way or the other, but to get debts written off like a bilateral donor would do is a better possibility. And that's why I remember, if we were to go off on a lighter note now, that on one occasion, the representative of the Vatican, who was based in Trinidad, we didn't have a representative of the Vatican based in Guyana. That's after we had opened diplomatic relations with the Vatican. As usual, they would come to present their credentials to the president and office of the president. So the representative came to Guyana, presented his credentials, and usually, as Commonwealth would know, after that, the president would invite them to have a little conversation in a more informal setting. And of course, the first thing that would come up in the course of that informal setting was debt relief. In what way could the Vatican help Guyana to address this burdensome problem? But then the representative from the Pope turned to Dr. Jagan and he asked Dr. Jagan, who is responsible for this foreign debt? And of course they exchanged kind of mysterious glances with each other. And the answer was that it was mankind that created the situation of the foreign debt. So the representative of the Vatican turned to Dr. Jagan, the President Jagan, and he said, I agree with you that it was mankind that created the question of the foreign debt and not God. And therefore anything mankind has created could be undone. And therefore I don't see that as a problem that cannot be addressed. So President Jagan and the PPP as a whole launched a very aggressive campaign. Because look, the country did not have the necessary resources, and running a government at a time that is debt-strapped. And that is why, to come back to what you asked about pre-1992, in the campaign, Dr. Jagan made a promise to the people that, look, we have to cut the budget on foreign affairs, we have to cut the budget on office of the president, and somewhere else he'd mentioned
Army, police.
In order to give more money to the social sector, to police, to education and health. So that brings me to an important question in the light of what you were asking just now. This is the question of, and a very fundamental question, this is the question of continuity. Because if you look at the emphasis and the attention which the government paid at that time, in the immediate post-1992 period, the emphasis was on health and education. In the context of continuity, that continues up to today. Where if you look at the budgetary allocations for each successive PPP government, you will find that the budgetary allocation for health and education has increased not only incrementally but astronomically. So you see many schools going up now around the country. And more money is being provided to security services as well by the new government, by this government, by a successive government. But the point I'm making was that because you did not, and in fact, the salaries of ministers were significantly reduced because the kind of money that the PNC used to give to their ministers had become unsustainable. The government at the time couldn't afford to pay that kind of salary. The salary was cut. Donations to international organizations was suspended because we didn't have the foreign exchange to pay to the United Nations, the OAS, the Commonwealth. And these organizations came down upon us like a ton of bricks because they couldn't understand how could you take away money from us who are helping you. But that was the reality. So it's unfortunate to say this, but we went wrong. Anil would know the word. Anil would know the word. We went wrong with the jury, which is known as a begging bowl, to the donor and international community requesting debt relief. Many conferences were held, many initiatives were taken. The president, I remember one trip we went to the first trip that the president went to India, China, Indonesia, not Indonesia, it's two Far East countries. And while we were on the visit to China, this question was still bothering the president. So what he did, he dispatched Barjagdeo to Japan to negotiate debt relief, bilateral and so on. And then, of course, later on, we got the multilateral agencies as a result of his meeting with, the head of the IMF and the head of the World Bank and lobbying and so on. Gradually, we managed to overcome, to some extent, debt relief from the multilateral lending agencies as well as from the... But I put emphasis on that because you have to understand, here is a new government that has assumed office with no money. Nothing much. And therefore, to get the resources, and then we had, I think later on, we had a general strike where the PSU was demanding increase in salaries for public servants.
I think it was 96.
Yeah. So, they say politics is a concentrated form of economics. If you don't have the money, you tend to have more problems on your hand. You might be politically more skillful in terms of managing the politics in the country, but at the end of the day, it's money and where is it to come from? And that's the challenge we had at that time. Of course, we were doing everything possible. We had to find innovative ways of doing things, what they call the local heresies, to find solutions to problems. But at the end of the day, we saw that, again, coming back to this question of continuity, and Alan mentioned the question of, and Gail, fighting for free and fair elections, democracy, and so on. That continues up to today. Could you imagine that struggle was fought from since 1968? At every single election, it became a big issue, up to as recent as 2020. That struggle continues. So when we say a luta continua, we are still fighting under conditions where we have a fragile democracy. And we have elements out there who are using divisive language, racial and ethnic language, narratives, that all that is doing is contributing to continuing the divisive nature, what we've inherited from the past. And so I put emphasis on this question of continuity because historically, we have it from the past and it's continued up to now. We have no other alternative but to continue that struggle along the lines we started out from 1992 to now.
I'd like to come back to you, Minister Nandlall. We spoke about the court system and what was happening at that time. So when the PPP assumed office in 92, how much or to what extent had to be, focused on, and how was that process like?
Well, democracy brings with it freedom. It brings with it certain standard operational principles. Among them is an independent judiciary. Gail said that we have been in government 6 times now. I don't think that an allegation has ever been credibly made that there has ever been an attempt while the PPP was in government or is in government at undermining or interfering with the independence of the judiciary. Not at all. I will sit here and boastfully say, as I have said to the entire Caribbean at a conference recently, when our first of all, our constitution is examined and its provision, and a lot of people don't understand that we have made nearly 200 changes to the Burnham 1980 Constitution, all of a democratic-oriented and philosophical nature. What we did was remove the heavy concentration of power that was in the executive president and gave it out gave it to service commissions, gave it to constitutional bodies, gave it to the parliament, gave it to the leader of the opposition. And that's why you have to now have an agreement for the appointment of a chancellor, agreement for the appointment of a chief justice. You have a functional committee system in the parliament. You have standing committees. You have a whole host of constitutional commissions. All have powers to scrutinize the judiciary, the executive. You have an auditor office now that is functional and that has all the independence of a judge of the High Court. So back to the judiciary. So constitutionally, we strengthened the judiciary and made it as independent as the paper can permit it. Then we put systems in place, in particular since we came back into government from 2020, where the judiciary, for example, has complete fiscal autonomy. Their budget used to be part of my budget, although I never at all had an input. I was simply the vehicle through which the budget reached the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Finance. Even that we have changed. Today, the Ministry of Finance, the Director of Budget, sits with the judiciary, and they determine, first of all, what the country can afford to allocate to the judiciary for this financial year. If it is, let us say, 9 billion, the judiciary goes back and plans its budget at that level. No direction, no instruction, nothing of how they must plan their budget. It's just the estimated approved cost is given and a budget is presented and put into the national budget, and when it reaches the parliament, not a single question is asked about it. It's passed en bloc along with all the other independent constitutional bodies. Now that is independence. And we have maintained that. The ordinary Guyanese may tell you that the judiciary has been unfair against the government. And that is not a statement that is unsupported by decisions. We all know about certain decisions that came during that very testing period, that 5 months period, that had to have been reversed at the highest order, at the highest court. The point I am making is that the PPP's posture in politics has never been one to attempt to influence or to entice or in any way behave improper with the judiciary. We have said to the judiciary, point blank, repeated presidents have said, we don't want any favors from the judiciary. All we want is for the law to be applied and interpreted in the manner that it is expected to be. And that has been our position. And that is a central pole of democracy, and that is what guarantees the freedom that we are speaking about. During our government, that there is a constitutional court that hears only constitutional matters. It is during our time that we passed the most liberal judicial review law that allows every aspect of the government to come under judicial scrutiny in that very constitutional court. In other countries across the Caribbean, you have to go and get leave. You have to go and demonstrate that you have a case before you get into the door. We abolished that. Our Judicial Review Act, you go straight away. And now I can say positively that it is now being abused, because all types of actions are being filed. The state spends millions of dollars in resourcing the judiciary. Billions of dollars have to be spent in hearing these cases, and then in the end it turned out to be a complete and utter waste of time. These people want attention, they persecute different agendas, I don't know who are influencing them, in particular now in the oil and gas sector. They pretend to be champions of the environment. In 2 days, two of those types of cases were dismissed. One, they tried to shut down the gas to shore operation. That was dismissed this morning by a judge. And 2 days ago, the Chief Justice threw out another one where they tried to quash the LISA license. That's the EPGL operating in the LISA thing. So you have that, but I guess that comes with the territory. The point is, however, that no one can claim that they don't have access to the courts, that they live in an environment where they are fearful of any act of reprisal from politicians. No one can say that they can't express themselves. In fact, we may be accused of abusing the freedoms that exist. This is a free country, and that is what we have fought for, and that is what the people of Guyana enjoy. And you can't put a price to that. Just compare that between 2015 and 2020, when you had fear. People's rice lands were taken away. People were locked up because some flimsy allegation that they threatened the president. They had commission of inquiry, police commissioner removed. Harmon wrote a letter to the Public Service Commission saying, don't promote public officers. Police Service Commission saying, don't promote police officers. Those things never happened 6 times in government under the PPP. The president interpreted a provision in the Constitution that clearly says that he must await 6 names from the leader of the opposition, choose one to appoint to serve as the GECOM chair. 5 presidents before him read the same thing, they never had no problem. He reads it and he says only judge he must accept. And then reject 80 names from the leader of the opposition. First time that ever happened. And then unilaterally appoint one of his own. And then when the CCJ ruled that he's wrong, he said they must show him where he's wrong. And then he has advisors who are advising him, don't give up during the 5 months period. Do not give up. History will absolve you. You take back the government. Don't bother with election results. And those people are still around. And they're masquerading on television as respected elders. They are glorified. And I heard them myself saying publicly, I had to write statements 2 o'clock in the morning to condemn those type of activities. Some of them are union leaders. They tell Mr. Granger, history will absolve you. Forget the election results. You have those people are very much around, and they still want to get back into government. And that is what the population must understand. They don't have that in the PPP. We may be incompetent, you can say what you want about us, but we don't bully, we don't intimidate, we don't use violence, we don't take away people's freedom now.
Before you go to Gail,
Sure.
Gail, with your permission, there's an issue that we overlooked, which I ought to bring now, because just for the record, because sometimes people take these things for granted. Because it didn't exist before. These are the electoral reforms. Counting the votes at the place of poll, a new chairman for the Elections Commission, and enter overseas voting, and foreign observers, and
a new makeup to the commission.
A new electoralist, a new makeup of the commission, and posting outside of each polling station the results of the voting at that particular polling station. These things didn't come like a magic. They have to be fought for, they have to be pressed for. They were part of the electoral reforms that came prior to the 92 elections, and that's what made the elections so democratic, notwithstanding the pushback by Hoyt, who refused to accept at the beginning the results of the elections, organized a big demonstration in front of Freedom House with pelting of stones and bricks and so on. And the police had to intervene, the Carter Center had to intervene. You know what Hoyt's excuse was? That there's no way that Jagan could have won 54% of the vote, because we don't have 54% of Indian people on the list to vote for the PPP. That's the lens through which he was examining the support for the PPP. That Jagan don't have so many Indian people on the voters list to vote. What he did not recognize, and Jagan recognized it in his book, where he said that even if all the East Indian people voted for the PPP, we could not have won the elections.
Right.
We had to have what is called the crossover votes of the indigenous community, from the mixed race community, from the professionals, from all other sectors. And how he couldn't accept and understand that.
Nor did Granger, by the way.
Nor did Granger, by the way.
Minister Teixeira, my question to you, specifically in 1997, correct me if I'm wrong, I believe there was an elections petition case, one Esther Pereira. Can you tell us a little bit about that and its impact that it would have had?
Well, I'm not the greatest on legal cases, but I want to just sum up in this way. Look, the 97 elections, Chetty had died. Janet Jagan went for presidency, supported by the entire party. We won. There was international observers that said the elections were free and fair. We won. You had protests, demonstrations. Then you had the involvement of others in terms of the Herds-Marston Accord. Then the role of CARICOM in the St. Lucia Accord. And lo and behold, to return to normalcy, the PPP was asked to give up, to stop the violence, on the part of the opposition, to get them to return to Parliament, etc., was to give up half a term, 2.5 years of office. This is a democratically elected government. And I think that the point I want to make, Travis, is that political parties come and go. The PPP is now 72 years old.
Yeah.
And it has shown throughout history, but let's go to contemporary history, which is from the 80s, 70s and 80s up to now, that it has always stood and made decisions based on patriotic and in the best interest of the Guyanese people. Because you could have had civil war in 97 if we said to hell with it, we're not giving up. We were found to be free and fair.
Yeah.
The international community said it was a fine election. We gave it up. And that happened again when we had the 2012 to 2015. We were a minority government with the majority of votes, but one seat less than what was AFC and APNU. They were not a coalition then. Not satisfied that they had made us, we were a minority government, they started talking about a no confidence motion. And our decision was go to the elections, which was totally in order with the Constitution. Every time we have been confronted with major conflict in our society, dangers to our society, the PPP Civic has always taken principled positions in the best interests of our country. Whether it is with the border issue, whether it is with internal conflicts. And so one of the things which Rohee referred to, I want to go back to, so I may not be answering your question well, Travis, and that is continuity. People have tried to play this game that these newer young Turks in the PPC who became president and vice president and ministers like Anil and others have somehow betrayed the PPC. And it's important to point out, when Jagan gave his inauguration speech, one was to call on every Guyanese, regardless who they voted for, to work towards the development of our country. That theme continues to today and is transformed now in relation to One Guyana and the whole idea of inclusion and participation. The whole debt issue that Rohee referred to, and Chetty was trying all the time, a very visionary and creative individual, and came out with the issue of debt swaps for our forests, that we had pristine forests. So we didn't have money. We had resources, but no money to develop them. We were poor like hell, and nobody wanted to invest in this because there was this doubt about Guyana and what were promoted then and now of ethnic divisiveness. And so the whole concept of climate, of using Guyana as natural resource, the climate, the carbon, which weren't called carbon credits in those days, but the preservation of the forest, the conservation of the forest, that this should be used as a way to make money for Guyana, has been transformed now into the carbon credits and the low carbon development strategy. The whole approach to health and education, I'll tell you my experience as a Minister of Health. We didn't have drugs, we didn't have this, we didn't have that. So when I look at my colleague Frank Anthony's budget, I am green with envy and wished in 1992 that was available. My budget was small, I mean, and the government did what it could do with as Rohee pointed out, about what our debt situation was. the IMF came to different ministers and to Chetty Jagan and said, this free health service and free education has stopped. If you all want to be able to move this country forward and find the money, you have to have cost recovery. And if you have 61% of your population in 92 living below the poverty line, which was those days was $1 a day, and in 1994, 96, the IMF is coming and telling you, go in that path. And the PVPC did not, government did not. It said we have to reduce poverty, we have to have a better quality of life for our people, we have to reduce infant mortality, maternal mortality, increase the life expectancy, educate people, because a small percentage of people are going through secondary school. Look at it today, we're almost at universal secondary school enrollment and completion. We have already finished primary enrollment, universal primary enrollment and completion. This wasn't there in 92. So we made a conscious decision in the political leadership that were we to choose the cost recovery route, Guyana would have had money, plenty of money coming in from IMF. We chose no. We took a principled position that we did not want to go in the direction of many other countries, including in our neighbors, to go for cost recovery. We have maintained the free education system and the free health system. We have added to it to allow private sector. That's fine, people have choices. We then introduced the housing program, which to me is the jewel in the crown of the PVP successive governments. Because it wasn't only about a house lot, it wasn't only about a house. It was about people having pride, collateral that would give them choices. It developed new communities so that the post-violence of the 1960s, where the Indian village, an African village, an Indian village, and African, was being dismantled. That was not the objective of the housing program, but we've seen it in the new housing schemes. They're Guyanese of all different colors. And that is building new communities, new culture of how we live together. These were what you call, the things when we started, we didn't think about that. We thought about shelter, getting water in your house, people living in clean environment. But by 2000, when the IMF, Chetty went to the IMF for the housing program, and the IMF said, no, if you can do it, we will lend you money. But for cost recovery, you have to sell those households at market value. And we said no. So the housing program was always subsidized. And up to now it is subsidized in terms of market value. In 2006, when Minister Irfan Ali was the Minister of Housing, and not president yet, it is the same international banks that said that Guyana was a model for the housing program for poor and vulnerable people, and also young professionals. And that became a model in the region. So the continuity, what I'm trying to say is that philosophically, we have not changed. We've been loyal to the views of democracy, of equality, of justice, of raising the standard of living of our people, reducing poverty, and that we've seen this come through the years with many struggles, with many difficulties. But where we are today, what has changed is the technology and maybe the methodology. But when we designed in the early 90s in office a pro-poor and a pro-growth developmental agenda, that remained with us right through. Low carbon development strategy of 2009 built on that and created the means to do it by using our carbon credits, using this pristine forest that we have. And it's gone even to a further stage now with Low Carbon Development Strategy 2030, which is our developmental agenda. But it deals with, again, it is people-focused, people-oriented, and trying to make sure no one is left behind, that there are opportunities, access to services, and you're still building on that over this period of time. And we're still correcting the nonsense and the absolute inept leadership of the PNC in the 2015-2020 period. We've had to undo a lot of the wrong, including them selling our gold reserves for next to nothing at the lowest price on the world market, leaving us with what we left them with, $13 billion value of gold reserves to what is 200 million in 2020. Taking our foreign reserves of over 780 million in 2015 and reducing it to 200 odd million. So I mean, those are what you call major issues to overcome, because it limits what you can do. And so the perspective of 92, if 92 October 5th didn't happen, God knows where Guyana would have been. We moved in from 64 when the PEP left office before we became independent as the third fastest growing economy and country in this hemisphere. By 1992, we were the third lowest with Bolivia and Haiti. We are now back again, 31 years later, as one of the fastest growing economies, not in the hemisphere, but in the world. And so it is under the PPPC leadership and government that this country grows and flourishes. That's why I said the colors, that when you look at what's happening in our country today, the development, the positivity, and to go back to the bench in Trinidad, this is our time. This is Guyana's time. All the different forces that Rohee referred to have come back into play, so that we are not on the Guyana bench anymore. We are seen as a leader in the CARICOM, a leader of the OAS, a leader at the international level. So our pride as a people has been restored by this preservation of democracy and its protection and guarding and developing a democracy. And I think that my view is not to see this as just an event, but that a continuum that allowed this country to move forward over very, very difficult times. So I'm not trying to brush aside that this was an easy walk in the park. It was not. But that despite all of that, despite all those what you call trials and tribulations, that we have been overcoming, and we will continue to try to do that.
On that note, you mentioned there the 2015 to 2020 period, and I know, Minister Nandlall, there's a lot that you wish to share during that time. But of course, before we get into that, it's important to note that that 23-year span of restoring confidence, of building Guyana, rebuilding what has happened previously under the PNC. But then in 2015, we had the PNC, the coalition.
Yeah. Same difference.
Yes, coming to office. So can we talk a little bit about that period? And now, once again, having to rebuild. What does that look like today?
Well, we saw, first of all, the APNU EFC, when they took government, they perpetrated a massive fraud against the population, or almost every segment of it. They went into government with a whole host of promises. Even among the coalition itself, they promised Nagamutu will be this powerful prime minister, that he will have portfolio responsibility for the agriculture sector, that he will chair cabinet meeting, that he will appoint ambassadors. All of that is in the Hormanstown Accord. What happened? So at that level, at the very coalition level, they diminished Nagamutu to a rubber stamp. I think this agency and the Chronicle was all his responsibility. This television station and the Chronicle. He got none of the powers that he got. And everywhere that they put AFC minister, they put an APNU minister to overshadow them. And they even break Ramjatan ministry in two, to give half of it to Winston Felix. So right there you had problem. They had distrust right there. The appetite of the PNC for control and power by unethical and unlawful means began to show its hand right there. And then the next thing that they did, the very next thing that they did, was that they raised their salaries by 100% and hid it from the population. In fact, they came out and they denied it. Raphael Trotman came out and denied it. And 2 weeks or 3 weeks after, we found it in a corner of the official gazette, because you have to do it by the publication of a government order. That is how they began, and it was no turning back from there. Economically, they had no plan, no policy for the country. For example, they promised constitutional reform within 100 days. In 5 years, they changed nothing in the constitution. They had a 100-day plan. Not a single thing did they accomplish in that 100 days. They promised the rice farmers that they will raise paddy to $9,000 a bag. They invited the rice farmers to a conference where Mr. Granger, President Granger, told them that rice is not government business. Go back and plant your rice. Right? They told the sugar workers that they will get increase in salaries and pensions and that no estate will be closed. They systematically closed 4 estates, putting 16,000 people out of jobs instantaneously. In one day, they knock off 2,000 Amerindians, community officers, that we were paying to work in the community so that they can have liquidity in the community, in the village economy. They imposed 200 taxes on the population. In one of my budget speeches, I said a tax from man to mule. They tax an animal that doesn't exist, the mule. The mule is an animal that it gone extinct. And they impose a tax on mule cart. They don't have mule cart in the country. They impose a tax on burying. The people who sell fish, walk and sell fish, they tax that person. 200 different pieces of taxation they impose on the people of Guyana. Then they form a thing called SARA. And they use Soku as a political weapon to walk around and intimidate the business community. Clive Thomas, the renowned economist, they put to head SARA. He gave a speech in which he says he will investigate the construction of every building above 3 stories. Because there is evidence of illegality. You understand? The fear that gripped this country. I was a practicing lawyer. Businessmen lining up to see me. Because they have to make crucial decisions. The GRE was being used as a weapon against them. Contracts were being given out to friends and families. The land grabbing begun. Lowenfield gets how much 100 acres. All the sea lands and river lands. We are still in the process of repossessing some of them. But when you look at the ordinary people, how many house lands that they give? We give out in 1 year more house lands than they gave in 5 years. And the house lands that they gave were our house lands, our housing schemes. All they did was allocate them. They did not construct a new housing scheme anywhere in this country. So any area that I look at, any area I could point to nothing that have been done. Look at GPL. You hear over and over about how they did nothing in the period they were out in the energy sector. They cut a mile of fall out of our budget. We could have had 165 megawatt of power now at a quarter of the price that we're paying it now. At this point in time, had that project been allowed to flourish. So, and I could go on, and then you have the discrimination. Valda Lawrence, the General Secretary of the PNC, says they're only hiring PNC people. That was reported in the newspapers. Basil Williams, still a High Court judge, that the last person who talked to me like that, he ended up dead. I am not making up these stories. I have court orders with the lady Brooms writing to the Public Service Commission to say don't promote until President Granger tells you. I went to court and challenged all of that. They took 50 rice farmers' leases that were given under PPP by President Dana Ramatara, the MMA. They recalled them, Tequial. And these were Afro-Guyanese who got leases under the PPP government. They revoke it by a letter, no due process. 50-year lease, people give immediate revocation. Look at the Red House. 99-year lease, President Granger gave the people 24 hours to vacate. That is authoritarianism. Nobody is safe in a country like that. No country can develop. We had companies like Baishan Lin who were buying the lumber from people in Linden. They chased Baishan Lin out of the country. Bankrupted over 1,000 small loggers in Linden who got forestry concessions for the first time in their lives from a PPP government. Bharat Jagdev gave 1,000 small concessions to Linden, Afro-Guyanese in Linden. And they all went to courts and they all went to Jumbo Jet and they borrow and they buy things on credit. And they'll sell their logs to buy Shanlin. And then one day they chased the people out of the country and all the logs left on the ground. Right, they bankrupt 1,000 families. And I can go right across the board.
Oil and gas agreement.
All right, look at the oil and gas agreement. They signed, hid it from the country.
Secret.
Ramjatan is now arguing in a group on a WhatsApp chat, ridiculously, that it was a decision to hide it because they did not want Venezuela to know. Because Venezuela would have used that against our sovereignty. That kind of ridiculous. He took 5 years to come up with that. The first time I'm hearing it was last week. After 5 years of concoction, that's all he could come up with. 7 years.
7 years, 2016, they signed it.
They denied that they accepted a signing bonus. They denied until we got a copy of the agreement, which we took a year and a half to get. And it is an express condition that a signing bonus is hereby paid of 17 million US. When Jordan was confronted with that reality, he said, oh, he thought it was a gift. If people are listening to me and they don't know these stories, they would think that I'm talking fairy tales. This is what happened in Guyana. They create a company in the office of the president, owned by members of the office of the president, Rupert Rupnarayan. What do you think name?
Homestretch.
Homestretch Construction Limited.
A special purpose company.
A special to do and they give themselves the contract to do the Dorman Park. The first set of money that took us $550 million out of the budget and give themselves it. Rupert Rupnarayan was a director, Larry London, and a whole set of them inside the office of the president. This is real thing. That fabrication. That happened in this country only a couple, 2 or 3 years ago. And can very well happen again. Because up to now, I am listening to them and they are refusing to accept that they have lost the elections. And they are refusing to produce the evidence of their victory. Which is the statement of poll that they say they have. They went all the way to Washington to complain about electoral fraud, and the people have said, where is your statement of poll to show that you won the election? They can't produce it. They stamp and walk out and say, PPP buy out Biden administration. That only happened last week. So these things that we are talking about going back to 1992 must always be remembered as that day that brought freedom and democracy to this country. And if ever those who are in doubt, and our young people in particular, when Gail Teixeira talked this story or Rohee talked this story, they used to say, them things could never happen again.
Yeah.
They could never happen, and they became lackadaisical. And they allowed the PNC to go back there in 2015. And they saw, very little changed. Very little changed. So, 1992 represents, as Gail said, perhaps the most significant day on the calendar of modern Guyana. Perhaps more important than independence itself, because we never really got independence. They started to steal the will of the people From 1968, we got independence in 1966. By 1968, the freedom of the Guyanese people were taken from them. They couldn't elect a government of their choice. That's what elections mean. Independence mean. Independence means you're able to elect your own government. A fundamental pillar of independence means that. That Guyanese didn't get that until 1992. They rigged every election until 1992. So 1992, I agree, has to be considered as one of the most significant days on our national calendar, at least in modern Guyana.
Mr. Rohee, I'd like to come to you at this point as we're now in that 2015-2020 era. Let's talk a little bit about 2020 itself. By the protracted delay of the elections result, clear sight of rigging and, you know, the subversion of the will of the people and the fight for democracy. What, in that time, what was it like for you? You know, what thoughts did you have about where Guyana was headed?
Well, I think that period was, if I'm correct, was during the period of COVID. So a lot of us were restricted at home, and people were on tenterhooks. It was a very traumatic period for people who would have experienced elections from 1968 to that period, because even though the process had consolidated itself to such an extent that, and GECOM would have put so many measures in place, so many checks and balances in place to prevent an election from being rigged, it was almost inconceivable to imagine that the PNC, APNUFC operatives, recognizing that all these checks and balances were in place, that the electorate had become more politically conscious and electorally conscious. There was little more other than storming the Ashman's building to seize SOPs that they could have done. They couldn't rig in the conventional orthodox way. They couldn't steal votes as they did before in terms of switching ballot boxes, tampering votes, taking out votes and changing votes. They couldn't do those things because transparency in the electoral process has reached a new height. So what actually they did on that, history had various components, and that apart from October the 5th being a historic day, when they stormed that building to seize documents, that was also historic in a different way, because it never happened before. So whereas the military seized the ballot boxes in 1973, right? On this occasion, it was civilians who were attempting a similar action towards a similar objective. Because when the military seized the boxes in 73, the objective was to switch the votes in favor of the PNC. This time in 2020, when the operatives sought to take possession of the computer of IT software and hardware and the SOPs, the objective was to accomplish the same as it was in 73. So what was amazing for me was the brutishness, the callousness,
brazenness.
I'm not so sure whether that's bravery. I mean,
brazen.
Oh, brazenness with which they executed that act. It was almost unbelievable. And then what followed from there, the several court proceedings that had to take place. People were glued to either the television or the radio, listening to the proceedings at the local court. the Caribbean Appeal Court, and then to the CCJ. It was a very agonizing and traumatic period for, I would say, basically the Guyanese electorate. No. So that when it became obvious that after the team came from CARICOM and they did their work at the convention, in fact, I'm now even hearing some who participated in the council, like Mr. Ganesh Mahipal, Mr. Nandlall's friend, quote unquote, making a lot of noises that he was at this place and there's certain documents that can't be found that legally should be in the ballot box. But we have, at GECOM, we have addressed these issues time and time again. And as I said, even though we fought years ago for free and fair elections, we still engaged in that fight because they come with some new issues. They want biometrics in registration. They want biometrics at the place of poll, at the polling stations. They want people to be removed from the voters list, claiming that there are a lot of dead people on the list. And then they confronted Mr. Nandlall somewhere on the East Coast, being in possession of a whole set of
ID cards.
ID cards. Where he got them from, nobody don't know, nobody ever saw these things. So all that I'm saying, apart from the trauma that the nation went through with the events at the Ashman building, the legal issues, in fact the legal issues took over from there on. We are still now sitting at GECOM listening to these born-again Democrats who are the biggest loudmouths on free and fair elections. Suddenly they believe in free and fair elections, so they want biometrics in registration, they want biometrics at the place of poll, they want a new voters list, they believe the voters list is bloated, and they want so quote-unquote dead people to come off the list and people living overseas to come off the list. We've gone through all of that. We continue to go through it because we want to make sure that when they come with these issues and when GECOM makes another statement on these questions, it puts this issue to rest. Personally, I don't believe that many Guyanese are enthused about the issues that they are demanding. I think Guyanese, on a whole, are fundamentally satisfied with what we have now. At some point in time, maybe the whole question of introduction of biometrics, and you see, if you introduce biometrics at registration, and if you introduce biometrics at the polling station, you know what they're asking for there? When you examine it in its totality, they're asking for a complete overhaul of the electoral system. This question of what's called continuous registration, they want that to stop. And they want a completely new list to be produced because they claim this present one is bloated. So how did they accomplish that? They accomplished that by calling for introduction of biometrics, the registration period, which means you have to go over the entire registration, scrap the NRR that you have, the national database that you have, and build a new one on the basis of what they have. But I would like to conclude by saying this. You know, looking at the whole situation, what I see is a dual process running parallel to each other in terms of how the society is evolving. What is this dual process? One process is the growth trajectory that is being pushed by the government. Anil and Gail went into great detail about that. In the housing sector, in the health sector, physical and social infrastructure, etc. So you have that growth trajectory at one parallel line. Side by side with that is matters that these comments also spoke about, which is the continuation of the struggle to maintain and consolidate our democracy and to ensure that never again we have rigged elections in this country. Tied to that is the constant narrative about Guyana being an apartheid state, the racial narratives that you hear almost on a daily basis by some of these people both inside and outside Guyana. And so you have these two parallel processes running through the society on a continuous basis. Both governments is fighting. Government is fighting to push the growth trajectory. Government is fighting, and the ruling PPP is also fighting against these intrusive, disruptive, and non-productive forces that are carrying a particular line to disrupt the democratic process. And that is where we are at this point in time, as I see it.
We're just out of time for this program. Still a lot that we could not get into and to unpack, but I would like you all to reiterate. We would have heard it from your responses to questions given, but why today is such a significant day in our history, and why democracy, like Mr. Rohee said, is a continuous fight to be preserved. So in respect to all of that, and especially with the young generation coming up, and history being there for them to know what has transpired throughout Guyana's history, can we talk about, in your final comments, can we just reiterate why today is such an important day and why it must never be forgotten? We could start with you, Minister Nandlall.
1992, the 5th of October, was the culmination of 28 years of struggle, 28 years of suffering, 28 years of deprivation, 28 years of authoritarianism and misrule and violent rule and oppression and tyrannical rule and absence of freedom. Freedom is the lifeblood of a society. The human being will perish wherever he is when he is not free. Freedom is that God-given right. Freedom includes freedom to speak freely, but within the confines of the law, to move freely within the confines of the law, to elect a government of your choice, and the world all over have provided empirical evidence beyond disputation that whenever there is the absence of democracy, whenever there is the absence of freedom, there is economic stagnation, there is social degradation, there is destruction. 1990, the 5th of October, represents freedom and the return of freedom and democracy to our country. My message to the population is that while we celebrate this great day, we must always recognize that it can be taken from us. We don't have to look far. Just at 2020, just 3 years ago, the world saw Guyana was put on stage as the institution itself that was supposed to ensure the integrity of the electoral process. The institution itself turned rogue and attempted to corrupt the electoral process. Not the army, as was done before, or the police, or politicians. Here, those who are put in charge of the system itself. So this attack can come from anywhere, from any angle. They attempted to do it at that very institution by putting their own chairman. Fortunately, we went to court and we stopped that. They attempted to do a house-to-house registration system, which we had to go to the court and get a ruling to abort and cause them to abort it because they were going to fix a list. They were running through a registration process that would have excluded tens of thousands of Guyanese eligible to be registered, most of whom would have turned out to be PPP supporters. So we would have lost the elections, or people would have denied their right to vote long before election day because they would not have been on that list. We had to go to court and fight that and get that to be aborted. And that was being presided over by the very chairman that he installed unlawfully and unilaterally. So there are very various ways and means. Rohee spoke about Mahipal. Absence of some document in a box. My brother, election is the counting of ballots. Once the ballots are there and the ballots are counted, that is the result. People vote by ballots. So this foolish narrative that they want to detract. When you go into a station, there's a ballot, you mark the ballot next to the cup or next to the palm tree. That is what is counted. That determines who wins the elections. Not some secondary document in the box.
Some list.
Some foolishness about list that the GECOM people, as part of the rigging process, they took out. They took it out and they want to annul the people's vote. So the point I am making is that these dangers and dangerous people are still lurking very close. And if we let our guards down, if we become complacent and lackadaisical, we can lose this freedom, unfortunately. And that is what we must remember about October the 5th.
Minister Teixeira, any parting comments?
I've always, well, first of all, for me, democracy doesn't have a full stop. There's no full stop with democracy. It's a process that is growing based on people's needs and people's demands, and people wanted to live in a freer and more equitable society. So there's no country in the world that can be said to be a democracy as philosophically conceived of and things like that. We're all in different stages of building of democratic nations. So even those countries that are considered democratic nations, United States, India, or Canada, or Britain, there are also challenges there in terms of a number of issues, as there are here. So we mustn't see democracy as something that's an end in itself. It must be the process, and that is why the issue of the involvement of the Guyanese people and all the things that Anil referred to in the earlier period of the discussion of people being stakeholders in the movement forward of our society. The second thing is that for me personally, as a politician knocking about for a while, has been my faith in Guyanese people. I have faith in the people of our country, no matter for people who went through, as Anil said, the trauma, the tribulations, the pain, the anguish, the hurt of those 28 years when we were not in government. The agony of Guyanese who left this country with very little, went and worked in other countries under horrible conditions because they could not stay in their own country, could not survive. That persona, that character that is Guyanese, of resilience, of perseverance, is the same character that keeps us going today on the challenges we faced in 2020. Part of it was trauma, shock. People couldn't believe that this could happen again, as Anil said. But also the stickability. So much could have gone wrong in those 5 months. During the recount, so much could have gone wrong in terms of the people getting wild and getting angry and saying, let's start create violence as previously. Our people were resilient. They stuck to it. They waited, as Rohee said, every day at 4 o'clock when the count going on, the news come on, the media played a role, and they're listening and they're looking at the ballot boxes posted up. It is that too that maintains us in this period now of transformation, of improving our infrastructure, of bringing new laws, of modernizing our society. It is that characteristic of our people and the faith our people have in that they want to see change in the local government elections is an indicator, despite the naysayers amongst us and those who are pointing to race and trying to divide us. What happened in the local government elections? It is an indictment of the PNC, because the 80 local authorities voted majority for the PPP. And in areas where we had never won, we won. We have the mayorship and so on in certain municipalities. That's why I say I'm boasted by always of faith in the Guyanese people to see and to do the right things. May not always be the right time, but to do the right thing and to understand deep in their guts, deep in their souls, that freedom, democracy is part of the DNA of our people. We fought for it, and we will continue to fight for it, and we must always fight for it. And so that I think is my last comment in relation to that the prevailing of democracy and its growth and strengthening takes time. Other countries, United States took 300 years, they still haven't reached it yet. UK say they've been doing it for 1,000 years. They haven't reached it yet. We're just, in the 50s, 56. We're still young. And so I believe that at this point, all the right, if one believed in the, cosmos and things like that, all the right factors. And so we have the opportunity to do and to really make our country a modern, democratic, transformed country where no one feels left behind, where everyone feels, this is my country. And that feeling that you saw the CPL when Amazon warriors won, that is the definition of Guyana and Guyanese, of how we see ourselves. And I think that's what we have to focus on. Whilst we always look out, never be complacent. Never be complacent. So that's just my comments.
Thank you, Minister Teixeira, and I want to thank you all for taking time out to be here to discuss October 5 as we continue to remember and celebrate October 5 and that fight towards democracy and the preservation of it. Thank you to you, our listeners and viewers of this program. I was your host, Travis Bruce, and thank you for joining us.